A very good afternoon to everybody, and thank you all for joining us. I think we're going to have over 50 people for this ISPE Singapore Tech Tuesday on data integrity best practices and tips for audit preparation. My name is Linda and I'm from ISPE Singapore. I'd like to thank you all for coming and joining our speaker, Kousik Paitandi, who is the Pharmaceutical Market Development Manager for Waters. And just a few hints about Kousik's background. He has over 15 years of experience in analytical science, managing chromatography, mass spectrometry, and laboratory informatics solutions. He's based here in Singapore, right?
Yeah. Yes,
and,
correct.
Yeah, and is colleagues with our friend Jen, who is also on the executive committee of ISPE Singapore this year. Without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you and hope you enjoy this session.
Thank you, Linda. Hi, good evening all. Thanks for joining today's session, Technical Tuesday. And I'm very excited today to share the very important topics for our industry, data integrity, best practices, and tips for audit preparation. As Linda already briefly introduced me, so I'm working in this industry over 15 years now, supporting many pharmaceuticals organizations in their digital transformation journey, helping them meeting data integrity and compliance, and as well as their productivity requirement. So before I start the presentations, then why actually the purpose? What is our purpose of sharing this information session? So today, what actually we believe that sharing information helps each other. So what we do, we gather a lot of information throughout, organizations or regulatory bodies, the best practices, and we share those best practices to help the pharmaceuticals community to, produce better products, quality products. So that's our motto in terms of, and that's the motto of also sharing the information. Now, before I start presentation, a small disclaimer that this presentation is for information purpose only, and it should not be taken any advice regarding any particular course of actions or to be followed. So also Waters does not make any representations or warranties. So we strongly advise that, regulatory agencies, whatever the guidelines you should follow, particularly for your kind of workflow or requirements. Now, let's start is what's the agenda of today's talk. So today we are going to discuss about what is data integrity is, and I will briefly talk about the different kind of regulatory findings, in terms of the data integrity, what we should learn from those regulatory findings. We talk about the inspection process, like how auditors will arrive your facilities, they will start doing the inspection, what are the documentations you need to be prepared for, and end of the inspection, what will happen. Then finally, we'll talk about the audit preparation process, the best practices. Now, as we say, before we talk about this data integrity, so the first question might be that where these applications will be or regulations will be applicable. So no, definitely the question comes, do I need to follow these regulatory requirements or, or all those GMP guidelines? So yes, if you are manufacturing active pharmaceutical ingredients or what you call API or finished pharmaceuticals products or what you call the final formulation drugs, or in case even in, you are supporting the industry for doing, for example, testing supports or, so any of those support activities you are doing to these APIs or finished products, these regulations are applicable. Now, what is we are talking about regulations? These regulations we're talking about the good manufacturing practices, right? Now, if we see any pharmaceuticals organizations, manufacturing this API or finished products, so majority of these, organizations, manufacturing facilities, they will be having a quality control laboratories. So this laboratory's sole purpose is to test those products, what has been manufactured in those facilities, and end of the day, produce those scientific results. So these results are very, very vital, because based on those results, we basically determine, the quality of the product, the safety, efficacy, all those has been determined based on those scientific evidences has been produced from those labs. So that's why we call these critical, very critical data. And since we are using a lot of computerized systems, to generate those data or store the data, so these are also classified as in the electronic records. So in a bottom line, if you are in this manufacturing API, finished products, or doing services to those organizations, then you need to follow those GMP regulations, and you need to follow those data integrity and electronic records related guidelines. So before I start, maybe one part which we like to know, please select what is your area of interest, and and which area you are working on. And so the questions are on your screen. You can select.
Okay, we have about 32% participation so far.
Okay. %58 participation. Jane, feel free to share the results.
I'll count down.
Yeah.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll end the poll and share the results.
Oh, very interesting. So actually the audience are perfect. So basically, 83% are responded that, the organizations you are representing, it's basically pharma, biopharma manufacturing. So I am sure the contents, what has been today, we are sharing will be very much beneficial for you. And I can also see, majority of you are from QA/QC. So you're the perfect in that way. Even if you are also in manufacturing facilities and equipment, also you will be also benefited from the contents. So thank you for participating in this poll. Look forward for more interactions here. Now, what is data integrity? Now, when you talk about the data integrity, first thing is, it's a very general terms, particularly. Now, to a layman's language, the data integrity, what we say is that extent data is complete, consistent, and accurate, right, throughout the life cycle of the data. So, I am sure many of you has already heard about the data integrity terminologies for many years now, because some of those guidelines are available over the decades. So if you see, in general, there are many guidelines has been published by different regulatory bodies, industrial bodies, even like ISP already has their very good guidelines, which is one of the gold standard in the industry. Where OECD has a guidelines related to the good laboratory practices. So some of those guidelines are available through decades, and mostly the industry follow these general guidelines. Now, when you talk about those data integrity various guidelines, what is the underlying message? What's the key message? So what is basically involves in the data integrity is these ALCOA principles, right? So as you know, ALCOA stands for achievable, who acquired the data or performed, legible, can you read or understand the data, contemporaneous, where the records documented at the time it has been done generated, original, is it the recorded versions or true copy, accurate, is the result scientifically valid or not. So these are the principles behind those ALCOA. And not only here, we are talking about the complete, consistent, enduring, and availability of the data. So as you see here, in terms of, let me on the pointer. Oh no. So every guidelines, the theme we are talking about is based on these, and these are some of the key parameters to understand as well as also to follow. Now, next part comes. What is actually involves in terms of the data integrity. So is the data integrity is only about, in terms of the guidelines, or is it about, in terms of those practices, or whatever? Is it about those computerized systems? So one key part of data integrity is the culture of quality. And when we talk about the culture of quality, regulatory body expects that, the organizational culture has to be maintained throughout. And more the maturity of the culture in the organizations, the risk of data integrity is also less. So in terms of the organization will be doing better if they have more maturity in terms of the good quality or good culture. So now question comes, what is involved in data integrity? So when you talk about the involvement in the data integrity, now there are 4 key pillars we talk about. That is people, right? So people is the first, even because, culture comes with the people, with the organization. Then data governance policies, and where we again, it's part of the culture, what kind of review mechanisms in place. Then we talk about some of those unique privileges, like in terms of whether every users in your laboratories who are using the computerized system have their own user accounts or not. Do they have the proper scientific skill, to do their functions or their job? Do they have the appropriate training? Is there any kind of safeguard mechanism is in place in terms of to identify any kind of data fraud, right? So these are involved in terms of people. Now we talk about not only the people here, we have another 3 main quadrant also, quality separations, because in a scientific laboratory, what we see, we use a lot of scientific instrumentations, and we use a lot of reagents, so basically what we see that, do you have quality instruments in terms of, do you have quality standards or reagents? Is your instrumentation technology, what you use in your lab, is properly maintained? Is it timely calibrated? Is the qualification has been taken care? What about your methods? Is it validated? What about the system suitability criteria? Do you strictly follow those? And so these are the part in terms of when you talk about the quality separation part. Now, what are the next part? We talk about laboratory computerized system. Now, when you talk about laboratory computerized system, generally we talk about mostly about those chromatography data software, or beyond chromatography software, there are other scientific software, right? So what kind of built-in integrity controls you have on those computerized systems? Is your computerized system is being validated? What about the traceability metrics? If you are using some kind of software solutions, or do you able to trace, end to end? What about the, review mechanisms in place? So this comes under your computerized system. Now, next part come about IT infrastructure or IT components. Now, when you talk about IT components, we talk about secure centralized storage. So, first thing we need to remember, do we have proper, infrastructure in place? So my data, whatever that it has been generated from those analyses has been, can be stored and very securely. Is the network system has been properly qualified? Do I have some kind of a disaster recovery plan? Do I have any kind of backup or restoration process? And have we tested for that backup mechanisms is working fine? What is the archiving policies I have? So these are main factors involved in IT components. So in a nutshell, again, we need to talk about people, we need to talk about quality separations, we need to talk about computerized system as well as IT components. These are all involved in the data integrity. So now what we are going to see is we'll be seeing some regulatory findings now related all these components, whatever has been shared. So I'll try to show you some of those findings and what actually we can learn from those regulatory findings. So what you see here in terms of, data integrity, warning letters, we have done a survey, so what we see, as you can see from this chart, is that there is a growing focus on data integrity, since 2015. And earlier we often used to hear that, I am in my region, there is not much focus, or, but it is not, it is not about that your region. It is not only about the US or non-US. So data integrity problem is across the world. As you can see here, 2018 onwards, the data, the majority of those, warning letters, data integrity is one of the key reasons. So around 56% of the issues are related to the data integrity. And out of these, as you can see, there are issues like 10 issues related has been reported in 2018 US, and a majority of these issues are reported in the non-US market. So if you are operating in Asia Pacific, whether it's in Singapore or it's in Malaysia or in Thailand or in India, any of these countries, these applicable and regulatory bodies are focused wherever, irrespective of the countries you are operating in. So what we should, we can learn from this. Now, let's say I'm sharing with you a warning letter. It was very recent time in mid of 2020. So again, it's an API manufacturing company. What you can see here, it's been identified during the inspections, and what you see here, that failure to exercise sufficient controls over computerized systems to prevent unauthorized access or changes to data, and failure to have adequate controls. Now, what you see here in this case, they have clearly identified, that your firm failed to implement adequate controls to ensure integrity of the data generated at your facilities, which includes missing raw data files associated with the recovered solvent testing, because those data was found in the local hard drive of those operating system computers. And it's been mentioned that their firm has been, mentioned during the audit that the files appear to has been deleted. Quality control analyst shared the username and the password for the operating system on each workstation. So there was a rampant share rate of, username and password. Standalone computer system, what they're using in the laboratory, were not properly backed up. So, this is another issue which is very frequently been noticed. Then, they do not have a good data governing policies for audit trials or its retention. So these are some of the typical findings. We'll see majority of the data integrity associated issues. Now, question comes that, is it only the data related issues, only in the computerized system issues that can only create data integrity issues? It's not only about that. There are also some associated challenges. For example, data integrity challenges can also form from the analytical instrumentations technology you are using. So role of analytical methods are also very, very critical. For example, this is again a observation in 2020. You can see here there is a poor control of GMP data. Again, this is one of the part has been observed during the inspection. But what you also see here in terms of, is very important to identify, there is from analytical methods also created issues. For example, it has been clearly identified that, your firm failed to properly integrate co-eluting peaks during impurity testing, which resulted in your analysis failing to detect out of specification results. So what is important that often we see, there are methods which has been, validated, or we are following some of those pharmacopoeial methods which has been long been, published. But maybe the growing challenges or kind of, environment we are working, those methods may not be sufficient. So we need to ask this question: do I have the proper analytical technology available in terms of, so we can identify, for example, in this case, co-eluting peaks, for impurity testing. So what is the bottom line here? Failure to properly detect and measure impurities, either through inadequate integration or through inadequate analytical methods. So instrumentation, correct choice of instrumentation is key here in terms of, data integrity as well, because this can lead to the problem which has happened for this case. Now, I have a very interesting case study to share with all of you. And this case, I personally, in terms of involved that, so I have seen the entire journey of that company. So this happened to a mid-sized Indian generic pharma manufacturer. Their major market, as you can see, was in US and Europe. So what happened actually in end of 2014? Their facilities, they have multiple facilities which has been audited by US FDA. And what was their observation during the audit? So they see, data integrity issues, there are a lot of issues across the laboratories. The main challenge was there was no proper technical controls and procedure controls is being implemented in their lab. And what was the result? Multiple audit observation. So what was the outcome after this? More than hundreds of people from different organizations, in terms of whether it's in the production or in quality control, they worked for more than 4 years. They need to hire external consultant for to take those remediation activities. It was almost 4 years. The company cannot send those products to those markets like US and Europe. So their revenue dropped substantially, and they spend $1 million again for the remediation cost. They need to hire external consultant, a lot of documentations, paperwork, and they have to wait it for again FDA re-inspections for to get the green signal to re-export again. So these are some of those typical challenges a pharmaceuticals organizations face due to the data integrity issues. So let's look into that. What was their problem? So the problem when auditors inspected their facilities is that analysts deleted the original files, did not include metadata with audit trails in data backup. Their auditor observation system crashed and lost all data collected on the instrument, including audit trail information. No user-specific login names and passwords. Analysts routinely logged in as an admin without a password, right? QC analysts use administrator privilege to change the controls of date and time settings in the computers. So these are some of those observations we see very frequently, and this is the observation of these companies as well. And that cost them millions of dollars. Their revenues drop. Many people has been fired because of all those kind of manipulations or the practices has been adopted in the lab. So what we see from all these learnings, the amount of remediation work actually it requires for a company to correct the data integrity, non-compliance, is very, very expensive and far more exceeding cost, compared to the compliance. So basically what we say is the cost of non-compliance is much, much higher than the cost of compliance. Because sometimes we don't, what we see is that many times the organizations don't really want to invest the money at the to take up some of those compliance activities. But what actually is being observed is that the amount of money is inflows for those remediation activities is much, much higher. This is article very nice, it's been published by R.D. McDowell's in a spectroscopy journal, and that I quote taken from there. So this is true for many organizations like this, and this is something which every organization should need to follow, that cost of compliance is much, much lesser compared to the cost of non-compliance. Now I'll ask my colleagues Jane help to this poll. So I'm sure you are using different chromatography data software, and you have different mechanism in place. Can you select what is best suitable for you?
There are 2 questions, so please answer both before the submission.
Okay.
We have 62 online now so far. We're getting about 9 participants. So please. Yeah.
I think it's a very interesting questions, like you have some kind of mechanisms. So what are the different mechanisms you follow? There is no right or wrong answers. Everything is fine as long as you have some things to follow in your organization, and so select what is best applicable for you.
About 45% participation now. I'll count down.
Yeah.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Polling ends. And Christina, yeah, thank you for sharing the results.
Okay, yeah, thanks for participating in the poll. So I can see, yes, you are using both the infrastructure. In terms of some of you are in workstation-based CDS, single concurrent users. Some of you are using, enterprise or network infrastructure in your facilities. So as I say, in terms of, there is, we can see both these in different organizations as well. So, and it's quite, this is quite also common in every part of the world. But what I can see in the second questions that what kind of mechanisms you have in terms of, so 23% have responded that, you are using some kind of external hard disk or thumb drive, in terms of for data backup. But good to see that majority of you have some kind of automated backup mechanism in place, which is, that's quite good. And also you are some of, 30% that you are seeing using some kind of a data management software for in terms of backup and archival process. So that's quite good to see. Now, let's look into the next part. What happens during the inspections, right? So we'll quickly go through. I'm sure some of you are already facing the audit, so you know very well how the FDA audit goes through. But again, I'll go through quickly in terms of the inspection process. So what are the different types of cGMP inspections? So generally, it's been classified 4 types, right? Pre-approval. So this happens when a company apply for the new products, particularly. So through the lens of that particular product, FDA comes for the inspections, and they see overall the company's facilities, the culture in terms of during that inspection. So we called it pre-approval inspection. Post-approval, which is very frequent, and generally this happens after the approval stage and monitors the changes in the production or the control process. Surveillance, again, also most frequent type of inspection for the manufacturers. I know, again, the part surveillance is just to ensure the drug manufacturers maintain the compliance within the cGMP throughout that life cycle. And for a cause is generally it depends on if the investigation can be related to a specific problem. It can be related to a field alert or product recall for that. So these are generally 4 common types of inspections we see from FDA. Now, what happens in the inspection? So generally in the inspection, whenever an inspector comes into your facilities, they will see they will inspect various kind of documentations, quality policies. So generally what you see, the general documentation inspection, they will run through your quality manual, facilities, list of deviations. They might request you different kind of documents throughout their inspection process. So during the tour, they might ask you, share the test methods, equipment qualification reports. For example, when you have last qualified, when it was been, so all those equipment qualification report has to be handy. They might ask you, can you share the list of users that who are using your chromatography data software? So they might ask you those documents as well. Now, the next question comes, can the firm confirm that that they can produce those documented evidence in the past events? For example, do you have the employee training record, training documents in place? Do you have those document deviation investigation reports in place? So if that is in the place, they will be asking in terms of, they will be always ask you to share those information. Is there any scientific evidence or support for made the report? For example, stability data, they might be asking you for those reports. How do you concluded that out of specification investigations? So they will ask you those kind of investigations report, the kind of scientific mechanism in terms of those how do you that, and how it has impacted in terms of your previous batches, those out of specification results. So these are the documents they will be very frequently checking when they come for the inspection. Definitely, there are different kind of inspection observations. Whenever they comes, there will be different findings. So those findings, or those are definitely evidence-based. So the direct observations on the cGMP deviations, which they can find during the tour, observe for not following any kind of written procedure, the the users or the supervisors, they also will admit that that violation has been occurred. There will be also written records or documents which can also take on in for the evidence, and throughout the tour they will take different notes, observe for that. So these are the observations throughout the audit period they will see, and based on that observations they will give you final your audit report, which is, if everything does not goes fine, if you have a major observations, then it is in the form of form 483, and companies will be having 15 days time to respond on that. So generally, if we see the end of inspections, it is around, there are three kinds of things. No actions indicated means they have not find out any challenges here. There is nothing to worry about that. Voluntary actions indicated means, there are some observations, but that's are very minor, and auditors are confirmed, or kind of they have a confidence of the firm that they can handle it. Official action indicated where there are issues, and they see the major deviations in the quality policies or data integrity part here. So where they might be issuing you the warning letters or other actions. So these are generally the inspections process. Now, our final stage is that how we should prepare ourselves for this, so we will not be making these kind of mistakes what we have seen in the audit findings. So the first thing of the audit preparations is there are already some guidelines available. For example, FDA has already published the guide to inspection for pharmaceuticals, and it talks about the quality control laboratories. It talks about the equipment. So there is a very comprehensive guidance available. Then, what is required? You need to have proper procedures. You need to have SOPs are in place. If your methods need to be validated, so all has to be documented properly. There should be a proper data review mechanisms, investigations, how you have done your out of specification or out of train investigation procedure, equipment calibrations, validations, calibrations report has to be there. It has to be, in a very periodic manner, and those records has to be available. Test results, whether your methods has to be properly validated, in terms of stability data has to be produced if they ask to. So say people, you should have proper training record. The people should have the proper skills, and this has to be there in place. Then, in terms of the data integrity, overall, the culture and mechanisms. Now, regulators are focused on the data integrity. So when we talk about the data integrity, particularly what the particular actions we need to look into that what we suggest that observe all the data, reported and non-reported. The non-reported data we call orphan data. Now, what we need to understand is that are the analysts cherry picking? Means are they only sharing the or reporting the good results? Are the failing results which has been deleted, hidden, or ignored? So you need to identify that part. Are the samples being tested into the compliance? Means the analyst has done some fine tuning in the processing parameters to pass the results, or it has been done kind of a reanalysis. That need to be observed. Next, is the data secure? Do you have proper access mechanism, privileges has been set up? Do you have proper archive or business continuity, disaster recovery plan? Is there any hidden or deleted data? So that need to be understood. And what about the story of the data to recreate it? Do you have those mechanisms in place? So if you need to recreate those evidence, you can create it. So this is all the firms need to be, take actions on that when we are talking about the data integrity. Now, what we also say that you do some kind of data integrity risk assessment. And this risk assessment, for example, we have taken some best practices from global multinationals companies, what they generally follow. Now here we have categorized it in 10, for example, we are talking about operating systems. We are doing risk assessment in every category. Is it operating system, software security, data backup, audit trail, folder security, date and time control. So everywhere, we are categorizing here. Then what we are seeing is that, risk rating. For example, what is the risk? 5 represent very high risk, 1 very low risk. What kind of severity and what kind of control element have? And do you have those detection mechanisms in place so we can detect those risks as well? There are some, good flowcharts are available in terms of from where to start, in terms of when you do the data integrity risk assessment, and how you can those access the risk in your organization. What we also suggest, you should have some kind of checklist. Now, this checklist will definitely help you in terms of doing a better preparation of the audits. So there are many checklists available. Even there are checklists available from organizations like ISP, where they have already mentioned in their websites as well. Now, what you also see, you need to have some kind of audit readiness, documentation, or you need to brainstorm yourself. Some of those frequently questions you need to ask within the organizations. That do you have that CDS? Because while we are talking about chromatography data, that 70% of the data generated in a labs are chromatography data. So we expect that a majority of the data, when we are talking about has been taken care. So CDS has been taken care well. So do you have a proper archival mechanism in place? What is the data backup process? Do you take a daily backup, or is the backup is automated, or is the backup is manual process? Do you have a disaster recovery plan? Means what happens, let's say your facilities is down, it can be because of a cyclone, or can be because of an earthquake, or it can be a fire, it can be anything, right? So do you have a disaster recovery plan for that? How are any unauthorized access has been detected in your computerized system? Is the computerized system periodically reviewed? Is there any manual integration your analysts are following? Is it allowed? Or if so, if it is allowed, when they are doing it? So is the users, have you done the user audit? Because as I mentioned, chromatography data software is the most frequently used in the laboratory. So you will be having multiple users who is using this software. Have you done the user audit? Have you checked their privileges? Has it properly set? So these are the questions you need to ask, in terms of for audit preparation. So what do you see from the inspection privileges here? No, we basically, we have to, if in a layman's language, we have to talk, we need to basically seeing the technical controls and procedure controls. So in technical controls, we will, in terms of, we will be seeing, whether is there any sharing of the user accounts or there or not, that need to be controlled. Is there any kind of delete privileges, and who is having the delete privileges, and when the data is being deleted, right? Is there any unsecured data? What about the audit trail? So these comes about the technical controls. Procedure controls is mostly related to the culture of that. So what kind of review mechanisms are in place? Whether is there any kind of orphan data? Is that all the data are reported? So this has to be, checked as well. And overall, you need to also maintain that, that the overall systems are always in a validated state. Particularly if there is any changes happen, you need to ensure that validation state has been, intact in terms of. Now, when you talk about the periodic review, this is one of the area where auditors are particularly looking in that. Particularly what is periodic review is basically a kind of an internal audit before you face a very important documented evidence that you are basically taking this data integrity issues very seriously, and in terms of you are searching all those issues there. So this has to be a proper, in place, and it has to be a very well documented. Now, most frequently, what we see the question asked to us is that how often should I do periodic review? Is it monthly? Is it once in a quarter? Is it once in a 6 month? Or is it once in a year? So there is no right or wrong answer. It purely depends on the maturity and the criticality of your data. So you need to understand what is how critical are those data are, and then you need to have those kind of periodic reviewing mechanisms in place. Now, another very frequent questions, what we generally see from the industry is that, how will I do the intent? But you need to understand the kind of data what we are generating in the laboratories. Mostly these data are dynamic, because generally there are two different types of data, right? We call dynamic data and static data. Now let's take example of chromatography data. or mass spectrometry data. So these data are dynamic data, because in terms of you to see the exact results, you need to have those functions in place. For example, you can zoom the chromatogram, you can see the baseline clearly. So this cannot be done in a PDF or paper printout in a static data. So data integrity risk may occur when an organization choose purely on reviewing the paper printouts or PDF reports. So we strongly encourage that you should have a review mechanisms, so because these paper printouts does not gives you the proper, with a clear picture of that. So that's kind of review mechanisms you need to have in place in your organization. Now, as I mentioned, that 70% of the data what you generate in the laboratories comes from chromatography data software. So regulatory bodies, inspectors are very, very particular when it comes to the chromatography data software. So what you need to ensure? You need to ensure that every user who is using your chromatography software have their unique usernames and password. Their audit trails are in place. You should have proper password expiry and the history mechanisms. You should have those access controls and privileges. So these mechanisms has to be in place in terms of you should have proper SOPs to review data electronically. That is the key part, as I mentioned. And you need to have those functionalities, built-in functionalities within the CDS, so you can do less manual operation. For example, there are many calculations are today done outside the chromatography software. They are using some kind of Excel mechanism outside the software. Again, there are a lot of manual errors. There are, in that way, it can also create data integrity issues. So you need to leverage those CDS functionality. You need to see that you can do those calculations, automated calculations there within the CDS itself. So this you need to follow when you talk about the CDS compliance. Mentioned data backups and archivals. It's very, very key. So you need to have a proper SOP and in place to ensure that you have a proper backup and archival mechanisms. Now, before we conclude, I have one questions to hear, these two questions particularly in terms of what is your present bottlenecks in your organization? Is it, is it the instrument downtime or quality of the data? And if you wanted to improve, what kind of improvement you are looking for?
Okay, we have 61 online right now.
Yeah.
So there are two questions. So please choose the answers to both before your submission. The answers to these questions will enable us to present our data more effectively to everyone's concern.
It will give us, very good idea, like, what is the bottlenecks are, and, where is what are the trends you are looking for, or what are the improvements you are looking for.
Yes. So we have 37% participation. 42. All right, countdown. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, it's quite interesting to see the results. So one of your concerns or biggest bottlenecks is definitely is workflow efficiencies, efficiencies, which is 59% of the responded has mentioned about that. So this is one of your biggest bottlenecks. Then it's followed by both in terms of quality of the data and instrument downtime. I think this is what we also shared at the beginning. These are all key factors in terms of, and what are the areas you are looking for the improvement. So yeah, this is a new trend, and definitely I see a lot of requests these two sectors, particularly increasing laboratory automations and moving to some kind of digital solutions or cloud platform. I see more and more organizations are looking for that, and we are happy that we are guiding many organizations like you who are interested for that. So this is very nice to see that trend as well from your response. and definitely we'll see that what are those options available to support in those improving your efficiencies. So as you mentioned about in this poll, right? So what is key factors you need to now remember is that we talk about technical controls and procedure controls. We talk about validations requirement, qualification requirements. So what is, things has to be in place is that you need to have a complete traceability, end-to-end traceability. For example, starting from your, sample analysis to final report, you can able to trace everything. You can able to link everything. So CDS traceability is in the key. So you need to have those kind of a quality software, chromatography data software, preferably with some kind of embedded database. So where your data are secure, you can able to track and trace what has happened to your sample, right? You need to have a service supported by your vendors who can support you in terms of proper qualifications, in terms of, validations of your computerized systems. So these are some of the key part in terms of, audit readiness. And when you talk about that, you need to remember that some of you responded during the earlier poll is that you are using two different platforms, both workstation-based CDS as well as also network-based CDS. There is nothing wrong or right answer, but in terms of what there is, both are applicable and we can see. But what we see the benefits of a network CDS, that majority of the tasks are automated today. So today, if you have a network CDS, which is basically a server-based, where softwares are installed and all your chromatography systems has been connected to the network and the data stored in a centralized location. So what you avoid, you avoid manual backup and archiving mechanisms. Since if your CDS have some kind of a database, so it gives you additional security. If you have access controls and audit trails and it has been centrally, it's been monitored from the centrally. So you do not need to maintain each and every system individually, need to set up those. You can do it from centralized. Sharing of your reports or methods have become easy because you often need to share your results to your external collaborators. So this becomes much, much easier. So that's the benefit of a network CDS. Your vendor should be able to support you in terms of in terms of doing those validation activities. So you need to rely and choose the correct vendor who has these service mechanisms in place, because you will be constantly changing or in terms of upgrading your in your laboratories infrastructure. So you need to revalidate as well. So you need to choose the proper vendor. Then another part, it is not only about the chromatography data. We also use a lot of non-chromatography instruments in the lab. For example, FTIR, UV spectrophotometer, or pH meter, balances. So you need to also ensure that there are mechanisms in place which can take care of both software, chromatography, as well as non-chromatography data. So you need to have some kind of a scientific data management software in place, so to monitor this the overall laboratory workflow. So to summarize that, what you should do is that if you review your data periodically, and you should ensure that audit trails in place, perform and record the training, create standard operating procedures, follow and select compliance ready systems, train all your users, prepare your response for any kind of analyzing into specification or processing to. So these are the best practices you should follow. What you should not do not share your user account's password. You should not give any kind of delete privilege to the users for any reasons. They should not be having any functionalities in the software to disable audit trails. There should not be any mechanisms in place to hide or exclude data. So these are the things you need to, you should, do not forget to back up your data. So ideally you should have some kind of automated mechanisms. So this you need to follow in terms of your, in the best practices. Now, my final questions before I conclude, that what kind of support mechanisms you might be looking from your service providers or suppliers, to increase your efficiency, or in terms of managing your concerns. So the questions is in your front, so please respond. Maybe Jane, you can count down. So we have the last stage, so you can see, and we'll take some questions after that.
All right, we have 59 online right now. And one question for this poll only.
Yeah.
So I'll count down 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Okay, so yeah, very interesting to see. 74% of the responded, talking about the support for computer system validations, and that's true. We are seeing a lot of requirement for in this sector. Workflow improvement, this is the second biggest concerns, and definitely every laboratory is looking for that. So, and implementation and deployment support, and further is method development and application support. And we do see the similar response from different geographies as well. So very well captured in terms of sharing your experiences here. So to finally, in terms of if we talk about now data integrity best practices, there are many. I'll suggest there are many guidelines available. For example, ISP is one of the leader here. They have published very good guidelines. You can follow those. There are many data integrity guidelines available. As I mentioned, you can visit those websites and follow those documents, best practices as well. And if you have any questions or anything, please feel free to reach out to us as well. We'll be happy to support you. And to say that, I conclude my presentations. And if you have anything, please feel free to ask or post your questions. We'll be happy to answer. Jane, can you please help me in terms of if you have, you can see any questions here in the chat box?
Right, we have, I think, at least 3 questions. Let me see. Not much time for Q&A, so we will have only maybe another extra 5 minutes at most.
Yeah.
The first question we have is from Bao NHGR. I think it's pronounced. How do we know if a specialized system in QC lab needs or doesn't need validation?
Okay, I think yeah, it's a first of all, when we talk about the QC lab and any systems, it is we need to see that any system, computerized systems, or it's operating in its validated stage. So definitely validation is the requirement part, but you need to see in terms of whenever you adopt those is that as I mentioned during the risk assessment strategy, you need to categorize it in which category it falls, and based on that, actions has to be taken. But any computerized systems or any specialized systems operating, you are in your QC environment, it has to be maintained in a validated stage. So definitely you need to follow those guidelines.
Right.
Other questions?
Hope that answers the question about. Second question is from Geoffrey Brown. How does the data backup method affect the controls needed to ensure data integrity?
Can you repeat the question, Jen? How does
the data backup method affect the controls needed to ensure data integrity?
Yeah, it's a very good question. In terms of data backup, what we see today, there are different mechanisms in place. Different laboratories adopt different kind of policies. Someone takes, I think it was one poll questions as well, that they take thumb drives, or they give access to those kind of external hard disk. Now you have no control where those thumb drives or external hard disk has been used before, all right? And the person who is taking the backup is also doing the proper backup or not, because sometimes we just take the backup, right? And we never we see restore properly, or there is no mechanisms in place in terms of to see that the data backup mechanism has been taken properly. So this is where those data integrity related issues may come. So it can affect your the validation stage of your, particularly maybe there can be external virus, for example, when you are using the same external hard disk to many computers, it can happen because of that, right? It can also happen there is no proper backup has been happened. So that affects your data integrity particularly. So there, ideally, you should have some kind of automated mechanisms where those manual interventions are reduced. And also you should have mechanisms, or kind of proper SOPs that you restore those backup and check that proper backup has happened. So that's very, very key area.
Thank you. Next, I think a question from Nguyen Hu Tian from Freemat Pharmaceuticals.
Okay.
Can you share with me some documents related to real risk assessment examples? I think he's looking for real.
Okay.
So I think this is a
yeah, I think risk assessment, we do have some best practices in terms of doing the risk assessment, and we have also services available, particularly the risk assessment or the gap analysis, actually the data integrity gap analysis services. So please feel free to reach out later stage. We will be happy to help you.
Okay. In the count of time, I think we will take one last question.
Yeah.
So a question from Christelle. Is it okay to justify for someone else's account to perform a test? For example, the trainee using the trainer's account to perform a training session.
Is it okay to justify for using someone else's account to perform a test? Okay, so yeah, first of all, it is not justifiable, because ideally, if you wanted to do a trainers, in terms of training, so there should be having a appropriate trainer's account. Okay, if you are doing some kind of a review mechanisms or data review, you should have a data reviewer accounts. If you are doing administrative work, you need to have administrator accounts. So as we mentioned, that sharing of the users or someone else's account using to perform another task is not justifiable. You need to have proper users, and their roles, privileges has to be captured in terms of, and that has to be well documented.
All right. I think in interest of time, we will end the session as of now. So if there are still others with questions, please feel free to stay behind for an additional 5 minutes. We could take questions or discuss offline. Thank you very much, everyone.
Yeah, thank you all for joining, and thank you for posting today's questions. It's very nice to interact with all of you and sharing this content. Yeah, you please feel free to reach out to us, me and Chen, any point of time if you have any further queries. I thank you, Christian and Linda, for and ISP team for giving us the opportunity, and a big thank you to Linda and Christina, both of you, for setting up all these and helping us to share this important content to the pharmaceuticals industry. To say that, I'll stop sharing from here. Thank you. Have a good evening.
Thank you, Kousik, and thank you, Jen, for moderating the Q&A. For any other questions, please do feel free to reach out to us. We will forward the questions on to the team, and they will come back to you with replies. So thank you, everybody, for joining us this afternoon. Wish you all well and to have a good evening. As mentioned, the session recording will be saved in the ISPE Singapore YouTube page so that you can review and watch back the session or part of the session that you might have missed. And if you have any questions, again, please do let us know. Thank you all again and have a great evening.
Thank you. Thanks. Have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.